Hello and welcome to On the Go with AAUW. I'm Jane Hess Collins. Memoirs are a wonderful way to preserve your memories and your family's memories for now and for future generations. But did you know there's many ways that you can record them? They can be written, obviously, but they can also be part of a quilt or even part of a cookbook. The book Memoir Your Way shows you how to do that. And today we have two of the 6 authors, Diane Hennessy King and Nadine Majette James, who are here to tell us how to create the memoir that you want. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
So Diane, I want to start with you because before the show started, you were saying that this book is really about letting people know that it is just a blend of the talents that they already have, their creative artistic talents, and how to map that to a memoir. So can you both of you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think that when we did, I used to do life stories symposiums, and we discovered that so many people had so many talents, and a lot of people didn't see themselves as writers. And people think that memoir has to be a written book. It doesn't have to be written, and it doesn't have to be a book. And so, people just, they're interested in a variety of things. They want to make sure that their voice is heard. And so if you're a really good cook, or if you're a beginning cook and you want to keep these memories straight, there's just so many ways to do it, through drawing, through cooking, through quilting, through scrapbooking. It's something that you're already interested in. And I know you have worked with children, and actually all of those apply to children.
Absolutely. One of the things I found that over the years, kids love to hear stories, and that's how you begin. The family is the first storytellers. And one of the things I always used to do with my students as a classroom teacher was have them interview their grandparents, because they all love to hear the story, that's how they begin hearing the family stories.
Well, what makes this book so unique is that it is creating a memoir in the many different ways you described. But where did the idea for this come up? How did you guys know each other, and where did this idea come from?
Well, we go back a few years, and the other co-authors, when I was referring to symposiums of writing your life stories, Nadine was one of the speakers. I organized it over several years. Our writing chapter author, our scrapbook author, all were connected with that. And so we've known each other really quite a long time.
And then when we got together, we realized we were all telling our stories in 6 unique ways. I was telling stories through interviewing family members, or reading the stories, or reading stories about families. Natasha was the graphic artist in the group, and she told her stories through, she actually had done other graphic works.
And Linda Poole, who had been my neighbor for about 25 years, is a really world-known quilter. And she put together all kinds of quilts over the years, and many of them really were memoir pieces. And in the book, we have lots of photographs of different kinds of quilts that could be made into memoirs. And the fun thing about, Nadine working with children as well, is there are all sorts of, photo reverse things. There's a PTA. We went to Louise Archer Elementary School, and we ironed on their pictures, but they drew the stories on the kind of fabric that you could iron on. And so they drew who they were, what their countries that they came from, what their sports that they really liked, and then we ironed it on, and we presented this beautiful quilt to the Louise Archer School. And
Right.
I think the idea is it really just doesn't have to be a book
Well,
in so many ways.
Memoirs are gaining such traction right now. So many people are writing memoirs. So, and the common thread through all the different ways that you talk about in the book is that whatever your method is, whether it's a quilt or a cookbook or a scrapbook, is that memories fade. And you need to preserve these memories in any format that you can. So tell me a little bit about preserving memories.
Well, let me pick out the food.
Okay.
Everybody eats. Everybody has a history with food, and you can come at it with so many different ways. And it's a great way to learn about somebody else, of asking them what their comfort food is, or what they ate as they were growing up. It doesn't have to just be, oh, the foods of my childhood. It could be that you're going to take a trip to Louisiana, or you're going to take a trip to France, and you want to write out what some of the recipes are, or it might be that you did picnics when you were a kid, and what did Uncle John bring, or so it can be written. The recipes can have stories around them, but they can be made as CDs, DVDs, file sharing. It's a great gift kind of thing for people, or if they're getting together for a wedding or for a graduation, favorite recipes from the bridesmaids and all that kind of thing. There's just so many formats, and one of the ones that is in the book that I love is a sweet potato pie one, and that is keeping a memory alive.
Yeah. My signature go-to offering to any event is my sweet potato pie, and actually it was the recipe was given to me by a person that worked at the school. We always had this soul food, and I was young at that point, just starting the school. We always had this big soul food celebration. And I didn't have I always enjoyed my mom's cooking, and anyway, she gave me her recipe. And in the book, I actually have her, where she wrote it down. It was just such a easy, simple, but rave reviews, and decades later, I'm still making that sweet potato pie, and I'll always remember her for that.
And I love that it's the handwriting, it really brings it home to you. But it again, it can be keeping a memory from somebody who has passed. It could be keeping a memory from your childhood, but you don't want to forget that you're important today, and you're making memories, both maybe with your kids, but also yourself, of today's, tomorrow's history.
So really what you're doing is I think expanding the definition of the word memoir.
Right.
Rather than just a book.
Right.
And so not only is it a cookbook or a quilt or a scrapbook, but it's really anything that has a tradition or has a memory or has something that will mean something.
Yeah, it just kind of captures it in different ways, and lets you express it in different ways.
In so many ways that we've come across since we've written the book. Other people have given us great ideas or shared the ways that we've done. I recently did a wine tour in the area, and a family had decided to take the family land, start growing wine, and on one of the bottles she has a picture of her grandfather, and he's jumping, and he's got on the fedora, and they dedicated that particular wine to the family. So it's like I said to them, this is a wine memoir.
So what do you think the interest is? Why are so many people interested now in preserving their stories?
I think part of it is it's sort of democratizing history, in the sense of, and I think the internet has something to do with that as well. People now are used to being able to have a voice, which whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or.
So you think social media is kind of promoting this?
I think it has, in the sense of people are finally saying, hey, you know what? History. History is not just the generals.
Right.
My life and my story is as important as anybody else's. But the problem has been that everybody thought, well, I had to be a writer in order to get it across. And that's what I think is so exciting about it is.
Yeah. And I also think maybe part of it is that we have so many blended families, so many cultures, and you don't want to lose any of it, so you want to make sure you do things that remember all of the particular things that, you know, your family, my father's side of the family, my mother's side of the family.
I never thought of Facebook as a memoir, but it's kind of an online memoir, right?
And country western songs.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
music and dance and folklore. You know, and we talk about different ways of capturing your heritage. And again, it's not just the family tree. It's you know, what made them happy? What did they love doing? You know, what kind of dances did they do? And it's a fun way, again, with children to kind of introduce them to the idea of, you know, doing a song list of of songs and music that their family would have enjoyed. And it's just, it's giving voice to so many more people, I think. And it's, that to me is what's so important about it. And memoir is usually, I think it's, you know, it's intimidating when you hear the word memoir because you think it has to be a book and it has to be my whole life. But really, a memoir is a slice of life. And it's both a slice of life and what does it mean to you. And so that's the combination. And you're really the only one who knows what it means to you. And so I just think that mostly it's giving people a voice.
And what's so good about the book is, as you go through it, it has a lot of steps. Here's how you do this, and it's good for any writer of any genre if you want to write.
Yes, yes, there's a couple writing chapters in there.
There are, and then there's a quilting chapter and the scrapbook chapter, and there's some other ones in there. I can't think of what they are right now. But you go back to, not only do you write of the narrative, because some people, I think, see memoirs as just a chronological list of events, but it's all about what it meant to you and why it was important and why something was a turning point, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things that when I started doing my research for my chapter of Nurturing the Young Storyteller, and I had mentioned one of the things that I usually did with my second graders was at the beginning of school, there's always Grandparents' Day. And so I would just have them interview their grandparents. And it was so popular. I kept doing it, you know, year after year, and we would start reading. Then I started as an educator, started looking for stories in which, you know, more intergenerational literature. Found plenty of them. And so the particular second grade story in the book, that second grader is now a senior in college. And but I had several to choose from because when I started contacting families, they all still had those.
Yeah, they held on to them.
They held on to them.
And you had mentioned also, or the book mentions, that writing a memoir or creating a memoir, whether it's a quilt or whatever, can be healing. So what is healing about a memoir?
Well, you know, I think Diane mentioned Linda Poole, who is, as she said, a nationally recognized quilter. Well, she lost her brother. He had an accident. He was a hiker and
a climber.
Climber and was killed. And what she did was she took his shirts, and I guess he was also journaled, and she took several of his shirts and made a beautiful quilt. It's featured in the book. And in each pocket, she went through his journals, and for all the shirts that represented each of the particular areas that he had traveled and hiked, and wrote, you know, his comments about it, and put them in each pocket. And she presented it to his children, and they always have something that they can go back and look at and remember him fondly.
Yeah, it was literally and figuratively a healing and comforting thing to put this blanket on. And she also, I mean, she made the one with the pockets for her brother's son, and then she used the rest of the shirts and made quilts for his two daughters and his wife. So, and that, I think that sort of old-time feeling of both keeping that memory going. But quilts have such a long history of, you know, frugality, mostly women coming together. You know, you see those pictures of barn raising. Well, the quilting bees happened also throughout the South, throughout the West, and so it was.
And we talked about how quilting covers all cultures.
Oh,
you know,
yes, absolutely.
Slaves put together the pieces of scraps that they,
That's right.
you know, that were the leftovers and made beautiful quilts.
And to show the path to freedom sometimes.
Absolutely,
Yes, yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
More famous ones. Yeah.
Now, it sounds like you have to be creative to create a memoir. Is that a true statement?
I can't draw. I can't quilt.
You can cook, right?
Right. No, I think you just have to let your mind go free and say, okay, what do I like to do, and can I, through that, try to keep these memories going? And I think one of the things that's been so inspiring about the book is people come up to us, you know, at book signings and things like that, and say, you know, I never thought I could turn my, you know, my patchwork quilt, or some people are, you know, far more visual, and the graphic artist group of the chapter talking about how you can do your own cartooning and how you can.
Absolutely, yeah.
John Lewis's
March.
It was probably
Who was, you know, he's a civil rights icon and
famous one that's being right now, that's been published, a trilogy, and it's, I mean, phenomenally well received. And he did it in a drawing format. He could have done it all writing. He had an illustrator illustrate a story, and I think you've talked about it for younger people. That's the most popular genre.
Oh my gosh, graphic novels are so popular with kids. Yeah. The one series that comes to mind is Diary of a Wimpy Kid. You know, but can you imagine how easy, if you present maybe the idea of telling, you know, kids telling their stories and writing their own little novels, graphic novels.
And just about everybody puts together some kind of a scrapbook. And, you know, whether it's your prom picture or your whatever you've kept, or you've just spent a vacation and you've got all those things together. It appeals to so many areas that people are already good at, or they say, okay, I would like to try that, and there's enough information there to tell you how to try it. But as it is mostly that people just never.
Well, one thing you said earlier, Diane, was something about people want to be remembered, or they want to live some kind of legacy, or they want to feel like what they have done or how they have lived is of value. So do you think a memoir helps to satisfy that?
I would think so. And you know, people always say to us, and you know, well, have you written your memoir? And mine is definitely a work in progress. Yes, I work on writing my memoir, and I teach writing memoir. But as I said, so many people do it differently.
Absolutely.
And it can be sort of almost like a lifetime thing. I mean, you might do a scrapbook, let's say, on that vacation, or one of my favorites is a friend of both we know. She did a 5-year scrapbook of photos that she and her husband one day a week would take care of their grandchild. And it is, you know, just one of the most beautiful books. It was like Shutterfly, but putting enough information and stories around it. And so when her husband passed, this is something that just, it's there. It's always there to remember. And it's just such an important time.
Something that I always, when someone says we're having a big party for, you know, grandma who's turning 80 or whatever, I said, have you interviewed her? In the book, we have questions, you know, for kids, which is even more precious, having that young one ask the questions.
And you can
about-
video that now.
Oh, and
that can be
videotape,
part of it.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
When you're, for example, in cooking, you know, and by the way, I took almost all the photographs in the chapter, let's say maybe half of them, with just simply my phone camera, and doing how to, you know, make bread from, you know, the yeast to how it rising, and then it's ready to bake. I just snapped it with my phone. So you don't have to be this expert at anything. You just have to be interested in trying something.
What's the most unusual memoir anyone's ever told you about?
Well, the shoes one.
The shoe one.
Shoes.
I was a local arts center, and as I was leaving, a little shadow box, and the owner of the art store had placed her dad's shoes. She was from West Virginia, and she said, cold country where no one had, you know, much. But her dad, his pride and joy were this pair of shoes. And so in the shadow box, she has a picture, you know, she has the shoes, a picture of herself as, you know, she's the little girl with her mom and dad the dad has the shoes. And so the story or the memoir is, when you ask about the shadow box, you hear the story.
That's terrific. What a great story.
I think all memoir people who think about memoir, and all of us are story keepers. And it is a way to tell your story.
Well, you brought up a good point. You know, we've been talking about creating a memoir for future generations, but then you brought up the woman who made the scrapbook of babysitting her son with her husband, and when her husband passed away, she had a memoir of him after he was gone, too.
Right. And I think people almost have to be convinced that memoir can be the present day, and you know, as you know, I've said it many times, but you know, and earlier today is tomorrow's history, and you have to say that this is as important. It's wonderful to go back, and the book tells you all sorts of places in the Library of Congress, and all kinds of references and oral history, veterans oral history projects, and we're so lucky in the DC area because, you know, we have the Smithsonian Folklore Festival and so forth. But you have to be convinced that this is worth doing, and I think most people are. They just didn't know they could do it. You know, as I said, they already have the talents.
You know, or they may find that they're already beginning it, or they've collected a few things.
Or maybe they didn't even
They
know
didn't
it.
know, you know,
Yeah.
or just it sparks an idea. You know, when they see the book, then they go, oh, you know, we had my dad's hats, and we had all the young men in the family. Just put the hats on and took pictures of that. So
It's just how you look at it.
how you look at it.
So you said in the book, it talks about how to draw, and I'm going to go to writing a memoir, how write in a way that you draw people in. So in writing, or even in the other ways to create a memoir, can you give us one or two ideas on how to make it enticing so people will be drawn into it?
Well, I think the name of our group, the Memoir Roundtable, you always think about, okay, sitting across the table from somebody and telling them their story. It's usually when you get the idea of writing in front of you that people freeze.
Right.
But if you can just tell your story as if the person is sitting right there, another person is sitting right there, that's 3/4 of the battle. And then there are tips and suggestions of how to write small, how to pick one incident. Again, memoir's a slice of life. It is not you from 0 to 70 or whatever. it could be when you went off to the military. It could be your first year in college. It could be your examples or your experience as a grandparent.
Right.
Or,
it doesn't have to be the whole wedding, but the funny event that happened, or the Thanksgiving dinner, you know.
Do you think people are just craving connection, and that's one of the reasons Memoir is so important to people right now?
I think that's an excellent idea.
That's true. I hadn't thought about
really.
that.
Yeah.
Because it's in telling your story. You're trying to be a witness for yourself and your family or your traditions, but you're also telling it so somebody else can see it or hear it or read it and say, you know, I get what that is.
And you want them to care.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think in children it builds self-esteem, and you know that you have a history. And when someone tells you, you sound like, or you look like, or you do such and such just like, you know, and you feel part of a bigger, you know, a bigger fabric.
Can you tell that your kids feel valued and important after they've done a memoir exercise?
Oh, absolutely. I think just the fact that, you know, when I went back and started doing the research, and so many families still had all those things that we used.
Yeah. And I think also it helps children in particular, as well as adults, realize the value of the traditions, because lots of people had, you know, lasagna for Thanksgiving, or their main holiday was Diwali or Persian New Year. And to validate the importance of telling those stories, it creates a wider community. You realize you're not by yourself. There are all these backgrounds that are important and need to be, the stories need to be
And
told.
you can share it with your family, you can share it on social media, you can share it with the world if you want to. And
It's a win-win too.
Yeah,
you know,
it is.
the older generation really wants to tell the story, and believe it or not, young people want to hear it.
yeah.
And
that's
young people want us to tell them.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Nadine. We're out
Thank
of
you.
time. This is On the Go with AAUW. Thank you.